Hello. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Literacies in the Help, the 2009 book written by Catherine Stockett, and the 2011 cinematic version. And the approach from which I will be analyzing both artworks is known as the New Literacy Studies, or NLS, as defined by James Paul G. in 2012. An overview of the approach can be found in the following lines. In short, in the 1980s, a number of scholars began to critique the traditional view of literacy solely as the ability to read and write, and to argue for a social and cultural approach to literacy. What does this mean? Here it is useful to recall the ordinary definitions held by many people and therefore by dictionaries. Cambridge, for instance, defines literacy as the ability to read and write. This is a traditional conception, but also as knowledge of a particular subject or a particular type of knowledge. Whereas the Merriam-Webster dictionary regards literacy as the quality or state of being literate. This in turn means being educated or cultured. But these two final definitions are closer to the concept from the NLS perspective. Using these words, we can say that literacy implies having a formation or an education, or, using Cambridge's words, having the necessary knowledge to function within a community or society. And here I should make a little amendment, to function within a domain of a community or society. This is because, as G argues, a person is multiliterate or has a multiplicity of literacies, which enables him to function within very specific domains. And some examples that he provides are the literacies needed to function at school, university, or even church. And more recently, the vast and diverse fields of the internet. These latter actually fall within the scope of a very related approach, the New Literacies Studies, which shares with the NLS a social and cultural approach to literacy. The following lines show how a literacy is acquired according to G. In short, a way of reading for a person to acquire a literacy, they must expose themselves, they must be embedded or apprenticed, socialized into a practice, into a social practice, where other people have already mastered this literacy, and which can be therefore transmitted to another person. Some conclusions to be drawn from all this, and which can be taken as perhaps new definitions of the term, would be the following. First, literacy is the possession of the competences of all sorts, not only linguistic, but also sociocultural, that are required to engage appropriately and successfully in a community, or indeed be accepted and belong to it. And secondly, these competences are either taught to people or learned by them, but either way, and as they are essential to becoming a member in a specific community, their flouting or violation has consequences. What do I mean by this? Here it is useful to bring this quote from G. Literacy has no effects, indeed no meaning, apart from particular cultural contexts. In other words, a literacy has different effects in different contexts. With this concept of literacy in mind, let's start analyzing the characters in The Help, both in the book and in the movie. First, we should note that throughout the novel, we find this division between the South and the North of the United States of America. And within each area, there's segregation all throughout the country, but within each division, we find a different literacy, different ways of living for the Black and the white, which, as we will see, it seems far more disadvantageous in the South. Let's start over there in the South by looking at the Southern white literacy, the general literacy. And let's take Skeeter, one of our main characters and the white protagonist, and let's ask ourselves, what can we know about her? What do her actions, her thoughts, her ways of speaking, thinking, interacting with other people tell us about her literacy, of the way she was raised? Well, to say the obvious, she was raised to talk to people of her own, that is, to be among whites, and to do what every female is supposed to do, being pretty, finding a husband, and eventually having her own family. Her friends, but especially her mom, are insistent upon this. That's why her mom says at one point that she's 23, but by that age, she had her 3 children. But by that age. This is also, by the way, this is also showing how her mom was raised back then, a few decades ago, when there was a bigger emphasis, perhaps, on the role that women were supposed to fulfill. And here I'd like to bring attention on this, we don't have much clues as to how Skeeter made a balance between what she was taught and what she experienced when growing up. The closest we get is Constantine telling her not to care so much about what people say about her, that is, not to care so much for being pretty or do what society tells women to do, and just being loyal to herself. That's why, after coming back from college, Skeeter realizes I've been dropped off in a place I do not belong anymore. Her way of being is indifferent enough so as to realize this is not her place, not anymore. Despite that, despite the disadvantages, despite being back in the same town she grew up in, she wants to find a job, even though that's not what most women do. And she resists having a job to clean, which is what her first employer wanted her to do. Instead, she insists on being a writer, even if she has to start by writing a housekeeping column. And the final thing I'd like to note here is the synthesis she does of her literacy of everything she learned when she talks to Elaine Stain. She says, I was raised by a colored woman. I'd like to write this showing the point of view of the help. We love them and they love us, yet we don't even allow them to use the toilet in the house. Here, again, she's balancing everything she learned. She notices this contradiction. She's taught that probably everyone is worthy of respect and the same rights, but reality is far more different. To talk about how Skeeter is coping with reality, or to see which effects her literacy has when exposed to a specific setting, I find it useful, interesting to resort to Ken Hyland's ideas about academic discourse. Even though this doesn't fall within our scope, I think these ideas are relevant, valid for our analysis as well. First, if Hyland argues that if the people that come to university struggle with acquiring the necessary skills to be successful, and we can see that the same happens to Skeeter, but the other way around. She has graduated from college, but she finds that her knowledge is of little usefulness in the real world, at least in a place like Jackson, Mississippi. For instance, she doesn't have a clue as to what people read there, like Miss Myrna. And secondly, there's this idea that some literacies or discourses possess authority. And perhaps the first, clearest example we find in the novel is Elaine Stain from New York. When Skeeter talks to her, she realizes how naive she is, and she recognizes she doesn't have an idea of how dangerous things are in a place like Jackson. But Elaine is. She has lived both in the North and in the South, so she has enough experience and knowledge, plus she became a successful writer herself, so as to be aware of how things work in each place, what affordances there are in the North, how many job opportunities or what people accept to read in the North as opposed to the South. That's what she says. No Southern newspaper would publish it, since she knows the South is very conservative and racist. And since I'm talking about this division of South and North again, I'd like to know that at some point in the novel, there's a mention of the massive march in Washington, D.C., led by Martin Luther King. And Abilene and other Black people are amazed by how many people are there. And they are even more astonished to see that 60,000 of those people are white. This means that in this place in the North, Blacks and whites actually work together. The deacon says Mississippi and the world are very different places, which is true. In the North, things are far more advanced. These things, like this march, are possible, while in the South, that's still not imaginable. But coming back to this question of being an authority, Elaine, given her experience and her knowledge, and being part of, as she calls it, a prestigious publisher, which is Harper and Row, she is in authority to reject Skeeter because she lacks no experience, but still she wants to train her, to at least to give her some advice at first. But this proves that she has the power to decide who enters into this domain, into a publisher as prestigious like this. If Elaine Stain was the first example of an authority, then Healy Holbrook is the second one and the most pervasive one throughout the novel. She is the antagonist, after all, and her power comes from the law system itself, and especially the fact that she is married to a soon-to-be senator. First, it's interesting how she describes, how she constructs the world and other people's identities. She says that Blacks and whites are just different, no real reasons given, and that they carry different kinds of diseases than white people, which is to her enough of a reason to have them use different bathrooms. That is why when she finds out that Skeeter is reading about the laws of Mississippi, she gets alarmed. She gets worried to have a civil rights activist within her league, and why she takes action against this. But she also goes around convincing people that Blacks should not be integrated in the society. She just doesn't want to lose this power over them. She wants to have them subordinated to whites. But even then, she justifies her actions, everything she says and thinks, even by referring to other people, like the governor, using his same words, separate but equal. And both in the book and in the movie, we find her acknowledging the existence of racists, but she doesn't identify herself openly as such. The reasons why are obvious enough. She wants to be seen as a perfect wife, as a democratic woman who allows even Blacks to live peacefully with them. But all this just hides her true intentions, which resonate with those of the government. So strong is her conviction that she is in power, that her class and her race is in power, that she even allows her boy to watch Yul May get beaten by the police to teach him how powerful they are. I was curious while reading the novel and watching the movie of how Healy came out to be like this. Who taught her exactly to be so hateful, so racist? In the movie, the only clue that we get is her mother saying, "Daddy ruined you," because she wouldn't even allow me to use the inner bathroom on a rainy day. But it would have been interesting to see that explored, how exactly she was taught to be racist. But anyway, all of this explains why the terrible awful had so big of an impact on her. Now I would like to turn to 3 instances of what I call a clash of worlds, starting with Abilene and May Mobley. Here we have the three iconic phrases that Abilene tells May Mobley every day. You is kind, you is smart, you is important. Abilene is a mentor or a guide to May Mobley. She is teaching her the basics of life, which does have some not so good consequences on the long run, because when May Mobley, for instance, she's using someone else's toilet on Healy's garden, she's just doing what Abilene taught her to do, something her own mother did not. And she is trying to raise May Mobley to have good values, namely not being racist. That's why she uses stories like the Martian Men story, which resembles Black people mixing with white people, only to be taught at school something totally different. If Abilene was trying to teach May Mobley to be good, respectful, and not judged by color, they are teaching her exactly the opposite at school. This is the first, perhaps one of the clearest, the most obvious examples of a clash of worlds, of literacies. She was taught something at home, but something totally different in school. And this in turn resonates with his experiment reported by G on how children in each community acquire language and literacy. And it is relevant here to remember the Scollon's warning that for many social groups, this practice may well mean a change of identity, by which he means this practice of inserting non-mainstream people into mainstream schools can usually means a change of identity, doing something in a very different way to the way they are used to. And even though May Mobley is a mainstream child, she did not attend school before learning all these values from Abilene. But anyway, since Abilene is the most kind person to her, because she's teaching her the most values, and is actually the person with whom she has the healthiest relationship, that's why she eventually says, Abby, you're my real mama. The second of this clash of worlds, we find it with Minnie. When she was learning to be a maid, her mom was very strict about the rules. She will tell her from rule 1 to 7, especially not sass-mouthing. But Minnie tried to resist all this. She did not like the idea of working for white people. But when disobeying her first white boss, the first white lady she worked for, she got fired in just 5 minutes. This resonates with this idea of G, that changes in a person's discourse patterns may involve a change in identity. Minnie's mother tried to change this part of her daughter, in which she failed. That's why Minnie got fired quickly. And it's interesting to know that we have this flashback in the book to when Minnie's mother taught Minnie to be a good maid. And we have something similar in the movie, this time Minnie teaching Sugar to be a good maid. Probably because she learned in the hard way not to challenge her boss so as to keep herself with a job. And yet another clash of worlds, another contradiction between literacies is found between Minnie and Celia, because she comes to this house expecting to be treated as the way she always has, that is, being ordered around, but instead Celia treats her as an equal, as if segregation did not exist at all. To the point she says, even at some point, I almost rather she would order me around like she's supposed to, instead of just being nice to her, because this is so shocking to her, to have a white lady treat her good, even to look after her. Finally, perhaps the most important or shocking clash of worlds concerns Constantine and her daughter. In the book, Constantine gave birth to a white baby, Lullabin, which I thought first to be an albino baby. That could have made the matters worse. And though it would have been interesting also to see this explored in the movie. But this plot did not exist here in the movie, as Lullabin was replaced by Rachel, a black woman too. But in the book, we found Constantine having to choose between doing what society taught her to do, that is, keeping herself among blacks and not mixing with whites, but doing what a good mother was supposed to do as well, which is loving her daughter and doing everything for her. In the end, the first rule prevailed, and she ended up giving her daughter away. And even at the end of the story, Charlotte says, "A Negro in my home trying to act white." So the skin color didn't even matter, but the fact that she was born into a black family. So this proves, yet again, that someone's skin color is rule number one, especially here in the South. We saw that Constantine could not even allow herself to love her own daughter because not even a person would look at her with, everyone would look at her with disapproval, even her own circle, even blacks. Now, there are plenty of other characters that I could analyze in depth, but I will refer to them briefly here, starting by Stuart. What can we say about him? Well, he's clueless as to what black people believe every day and the norms they have to follow. He's so naive that he has to say, "Things are fine around here. Why would you go stirring up trouble?" He says he's too scared, completely unaware of the incidents that happened just months ago. Of that man, for instance, that was killed, shot in front of his children by the KKK. Or Mayor Thompson, agreeing with Governor Ross Barnett that the races will be kept separate forever. That aside, we should also appreciate the good values, the good traits that other characters display. Yul May, for instance, had been working really hard with her husband to send her two boys to college. And not all white people were mean to their mates. Lou Ann Templeton, for example, was nice, loved Lavinia, honestly, genuinely. And we should also appreciate the stories of each of the mates and their being grateful for all they received despite the injustice. The last thing I would like to bring attention to are the values and the features that are promoted within the Black community. Specifically, Abilene, she has always been told that how smart she was and to keep reading and writing every day. But yet again, she was taught something good, positive for her, only to find something different in the real world, as whites would not allow her into libraries to borrow books. This resonates with G's idea that literacy had to be used with caution. Otherwise, some social groups like the poor would become too aware of their situation and try to change the current society. And I thought it was interesting to show how different, how cheerful the environment seems to be when they gather up in church compared to their everyday lives when they are at work. Especially Abilene's face shows everything. She goes unfair. She's treated unfairly every day, and she still has this bitterness within her, especially since Trilor died, that she can't bring herself to loving the enemy, as the priest says. He even encourages all the community to dare to do what is right. All these things, all this encouragement must be what is bringing Abilene to speak up, to tell her story. And that is why all this encouragement eventually results in the writing of the help of the book, and the church thanks both Abilene and Minnie for being brave, for being consistent, for fighting up and not giving up on wanting to change things. Let me recapitulate what I have done. In the presentation, I have redefined literacy not only as not just the ability to read and write anymore, but the ability to function within specific domains of a community or society. We have seen that there are two general black and white literacies, both in the South and in the North of the US, back then in the 1960s. There are specific literacies that hold power and determine in turn which other literacies can be admitted, and which are represented by characters like Elaine Stain, Healy, Ross Barnett, Miss Taylor, among others. Particularly, we have seen that several characters experience, or just reveal, a contradiction between two or more of their literacies. And this was most clearly seen with Skeeter, Minnie, and May Mobley. And finally, and most importantly, our three main characters, Skeeter, Abilene, and Minnie, unite to create The Help, a book which they hope will help people acquire a different literacy to that found in the society thus far, and which has social equality, kindness, empathy, and unity as their core features. Thank you.